Okay, so David, thank you so much for participating in our interview today. We really appreciate you and we appreciate your leadership. And as always, we begin all things by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without passion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So, David, please, can you introduce yourself to our listeners and viewers and tell us about your remarkable work?
Thank you so much to have the conversation, Matt, and want to recognize that I am coming to you today on the traditional lands of the Salish community on the West Coast, and also want to recognize all the amazing work that Setsi's been doing to increase the conversation around these critical issues of what's going on with the social economy, with social finance, and I'm coming to you with a perspective of many years of working in social enterprise, and over the last 10 years, really focusing on the demand side of the market. So 10 years ago, when we started Buy Social Canada, it really was for the purpose of trying to look at the economy, not just from the supply side, but how do we actually move the demand side of the market to support social value outcomes. We're trying to, many years ago, working in social enterprise, we knew we were trying to address issues through business models, but then we recognized, how do we start to really get government and corporations and individuals to look at the impact of their purchasing, right? So it's great to have the opportunity to talk to you about how the social value marketplace can be created through the activities that we're already doing. We just have to pay attention to what outcomes we want.
And can you articulate your personal mission and vision for us?
Oh, a personal vision or mission is really about trying to respect what I feel is my responsibility back to community. I'm one of the very privileged people to have been born as a white male in North America during the baby boomers time. So all kinds of privileges and advantages that came by birth, not by, power or anything else. So I think there's a obligation that I have felt from a long time of how do we contribute back. Things have been really provided, but then as I started to learn more and got a bit older, got a bit more experienced, started to see that things in society were not always equal, and it wasn't equality, and it wasn't justice because people were bad people, um, which we try to blame on the individual. But I started to understand that it's actually systemic issues of how society is formed. And for me, I tracked that down to it's really the economic framework that we use. And growing up in North America, first in the United States, and then the last 20 some years in Canada, I realized very early on that unless we could change the framework of the economy from being an economy based on extraction and exploitation, we would never solve the issues that seemed so clear to me. I mean, issues around, racism because of, uh, capitalism, inequality because of capitalism, lack of opportunity because of capitalism. So it's really been an attempt to try to understand, how do we create new structures within the existing economy. In and it's great that we started the conversation by recognizing the Indigenous community and Indigenous history, that we work within. Because when we look at the economy and we go back a couple thousand years, it was the indigenous communities that were trading for value between each other, corn for fish, jewels for corn, things that created healthy communities. And when the Europeans came, they didn't only come as people, they came with an economy. And that economy was about extraction and exploitation. So how do we, and so personally, I've always tried to find a way to contribute to that model of, if we can change the value upon which we trade, we can change the outcomes of trading.
I love that. I love that. I love how you put that. And it's so true. You know, who doesn't love, the good old fashioned bartering system, you know? It was peaceful and it worked, right?
Yeah, and it even went beyond. It's interesting because when you talk and read about what the messages were, it wasn't only just bartering, but it was an interesting gift economy. So when you look back at the potlatches on the West Coast, they were about those who had giving back to the community. Or you look at how were things distributed in the indigenous communities. Everyone put everything in a warehouse and then you used as you needed. So it wasn't even a barter of this for that. It was even a step, I think, more glorious than that, of this is about gifting to you because I have something, and then we exchange gifts. So it's a fascinating kind of concept to move beyond what we've thought about as how the economy works, which is I've got to get more value out than what I put in, as opposed to saying, what if we all put in and then we use as we need and share. So and that's why I think when we think about like social enterprise, a lot of times people think, oh, that's a nice business model. Well, it's not just a business model. It's a totally disruptive process, because a social enterprise, by the very fact that it starts with a social purpose, that it reinvests any profits back into a social purpose, but it's in the marketplace. That's not just a different business model. That's a revolution within the existing marketplace.
Exactly. I was just about to say that, like that revolutionary level, that really is creating a massive impact for the better. So thank you for that. And what inspires you most about your current work?
I think what's inspiring right now is the shift we're seeing. I think seeing like the work that is going on with younger people. I get the opportunity to work with our team at Social Canada, and they're young, creative women who are, taking their talents and putting them toward shifting the values in the marketplace. They're working on creating opportunities for people. They're looking at how do you create a marketplace that has social inclusion as an outcome. And what is inspiring me is they represent, I think, a whole new generation of, like yourself, and the work that Setsi's doing is really inspiring, because it's people who are starting to look at this as not just a I can solve this with a charitable contribution, or I can solve this by creating a shelter, or I can solve this by creating a food bank. You guys are amazing, because we're looking at systems shifting. We're looking at, how does the economy work? We're looking at how does housing access work? We're looking at how does education work? So when we start to look at the systems behind what's creating the problems, and we think about, someone asked me how was the weather this summer, and you go like, the weather was great, but I don't want to think about why, because one of the reasons the weather was great is climate change. But because of that, we had lots of sunshine, but now water is a real problem on the West Coast, droughts everywhere, the fires that we've seen. So what is inspiring me is people are starting to look at the systems behind, and that's where the change has to happen.
And what challenges and barriers do you face in your work, and how are you and your team working to overcome them?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is very reflective on what we've just been talking about, and that is the dominant culture, the dominant economy, the dominant model in the North American context is really built on this sort of this economy that came out of, a model that is driven by economic profit and that is dependent upon and grown upon things like racism and exclusion, not immigration for value, but immigration for extraction, and even built upon the fact that stolen land. So I think having that history and having that kind of context, and some of us understand it and look at it differently, but a lot of denial of that. So we still have a dominant model that business is success when it grows and it makes more money. Um, if we can start to break down that cultural dominance, then there's hope. But I think the difficulty is it's so integrated into the very processes of how people work and how they're rewarded and how they're recognized, and that becomes difficult because we're not talking about just finding some solutions. We're talking about having to shift an entire culture and an entire set of values.
Agree more. And how do you feel about the future of social procurement in Canada?
Actually, right now is it's quite exciting to be talking about the future of social procurement in Canada because um, we're seeing some significant shifts in some very big players. When you think about the federal government, that they spend $23 billion a year buying goods and services. And up until last year, when they changed their policy was let's go out to market and get the lowest price possible. Well, their new policy that they're now starting to implement is we want to purchase to get the best value. We want to look at what are the social, environmental, and cultural outcomes when we buy things. So to see the federal government make a shift from lowest price to look at best value, that's really significant. I think when we start to see the construction industry leading the private sector, where they're no longer talking about uh, we're really good because we come in with the lowest price on time, but they're talking about building a school is important because it's building community. The building is part of the process, so they're contributing to community. They're looking at their supply chains. They're looking at diversity in their employees. So we start to see the private sector really start to look at this. And we're seeing a lot of municipalities. And I think because the municipalities are really close to a lot of the social issues like homelessness, they're starting to look at when we spend money, what value are we creating? Are we supporting our local businesses? So you see a municipality like Peterborough, look at where do we spend our office supplies? Do we go online and just buy from whoever is cheapest, or do we actually make the effort to buy from the family-owned local business that has this office supply that keeps the money in the community, it keeps jobs in the community? We're looking at like City of Toronto re-examining their social procurement policy to see if it can be more successful than what it has been. Wood Buffalo, rural communities in northern Alberta looking at how do we increase Indigenous opportunities in our supply chain. Um, Vancouver Island communities like Tofino, Victoria, Cumberland coming together and saying, we spend money and we're trying to create healthy communities. How do we connect those things? So I think right now it's really quite exciting to be involved in social procurement because it's really become an awareness and you hear more and more people talking about it. And I think people are understanding it's a pretty simple tool. Everybody buys things. Every time we buy something, there's a social, economic, environmental, cultural impact. Intentional purchasing can have intentional value creation.
Absolutely. That is such a beneficial model to help to build community now and in the future, right? For our future.
Yeah, and it is. That's a great point because it's not just an immediate. I mean, we're investing in a future because I think too much of that purchasing, as you point out, is what's my immediate return? My immediate return is cheaper. But you're right, absolutely. Rather than just looking at the immediate, we're looking at it as an investment in the future. So social procurement, that's a great way to put it, Maud, is really an investment in our future. And maybe that's how we should start to talk about it more. It's not like what did I take, but what did I give back to the future?
Exactly. Love that. And guess what? I have a similar question for you. How do you feel about the future of social finance in Canada?
There's a lot of discussion. There's a lot of potential. There's a lot of need, but I don't know that it's actually going to have the impact that we need given the current situation of the way it's being structured. The Social Finance Fund, I think, is an amazing concept and model to get the conversation going, but the mechanics of it, I think we'll have to see. Will it really reach at an affordable basis the marginalized communities it was intended for? Um, we have time to look at that. I think on the other side of some of the potential tools that have been created by government, um, I look at things like the Business Development Bank of Canada, $47 billion in asset, a federal crown corporation. But if you're a nonprofit, you don't have access to their technical support or to their financing. But if you're a for-profit business, they're there to support you, to help you grow, to help you find markets, and to finance you. Well, that's a government program. So why would a government program not be concerned about how they contribute to social finance? So hopefully they get beyond just we want to do things that are socially responsible to actually using their dollars to do that. And I think until we look at the banks as instruments of community building, not instruments for shareholder profits, um, that's going to be a tough slog because the banks still, every quarter they don't report on anything other than our profits. And you're seeing quarterly profits by the big banks in the billions of dollars. I mean, the interest rate doesn't make a difference to them because they just pass that along. It's like your home mortgage is based on the interest rate. If their interest rate goes up, your interest rate goes up. Same thing for borrowing money. So we've got to look at banking as an industry, which can't just be extracting so much profit out of the economy. We've got to look at the existing tools like community futures, the Business Development Bank, and say, these are government programs. Why aren't they involved in social finance? And then we look at the Social Finance Fund and say, how can we even push this further? If we're going to be innovative, this might be innovation ground, not grounds for doing what we've been doing before.
Exactly. You touched on so many key important issues, and I'm so grateful for Setsi and by Social Canada, people like yourself that are holding these big players accountable. It's about time. It's long overdue for sure. And do you
It's long overdue is the right statement, Mahat. But I think that's what we were talking about earlier. It's like, what are the opportunities of the future? More people are talking about it, right? And as more people talk about it, I think that gives us the hope that it's going to become more the conversation, and it will influence the decision making in the public policy arena.
absolutely. And do you have any set of key priorities in your work right now?
Well, right now, there's some key priorities. We're making transitions here at Social Canada, where I'm going to move away from the day-to-day. I've been doing that for a long time, and it's time for a new set of leadership. We've got a new set of challenges ahead of us of how do we continue to look at this in the long term. To go back to your point about how do we invest in the future, I think for Social Canada now is a time to invest in the future. So like with Liz Check-Blount coming in as our new CEO and Tori Williamson coming in as our new Chief Operating Officer, I can take a step back so that new leadership and younger leadership and leadership coming with a more diverse lens than a white male perspective, I think is going to be really valuable and important. So that's taking up a lot of time. And I think the other thing is I think we've got to start building some kind of bridges between some of the pieces. And I think in our ecosystem, when we start to think about, social procurement, social enterprise, diverse ownership, social finance, I think we've got a lot of pieces floating around. And that's why I love the work that, Setsi and others are doing. It's like, how do we start to bring these pieces together into a cohesive conversation that we can have more impact in the future because we have more collaboration of the pieces that are trying to shift that dominant economic culture?
That's right. Absolutely. I totally agree. And what is oh, actually I said this already, I think. Oh yes, no. What is your ultimate goal and what does success look like to you and your colleagues?
So I think they can break those down because I think there's a personal role, and that personal role is really based on uh, an obligation that I feel, which is to um, do what I can do to contribute to this effort to make the change that's necessary to make the shift to a different economy, to make the shift to a different type of communities, to make healthier communities. And that's a personal thing, but I think as an organization, it's very reflective of those same values, where our whole purpose is to look at how do we create a social value marketplace, a marketplace where we're creating community capital, not just economic capital. So when we're trading goods and services, we're creating a marketplace that looks at human capital, environmental capital, social capital, cultural capital. So we're looking at how does the marketplace, which we need to have because people are always going to have different values, different things they have, and there's going to be trading, there's going to be selling, there's going to be buying, but how do we shift the value of that so that the marketplace becomes a tool to build healthy communities? So that's really underlying what we're trying to do. What that means on a daily basis is like, how do you create a community benefit agreement that makes sure there's, local and social buying? So I think that, we will always be trying to build the tools that create the journey toward that future, but we have to have that future vision in mind, or the tools won't be leading us there.
That's right. Yeah, future benefit agreement. I love that. Community you say community benefit agreement, right?
Right. And if we don't create the right tools, we won't get the result we want. So I think that's why, these discussions become so important, is we're trying to create the tools and the resources that are going to contribute to healthier communities. So it becomes so important to hold that ultimate vision in mind and to be able to debate that and debate what's the path to get there. Not a single path, but how do our joint journeys or our joint paths collaborate to build that better future.
Absolutely. That's amazing. So do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action at this time?
I think the biggest call to action at this time is that we start to understand how all these pieces of what we're trying to do, the work that Setsi is doing, by Social Canada, SEDNet, and others, are really going in the same direction, but we don't always speak the same language. So how do we translate our languages into a shared vision of the future and then work more effectively to take the steps that are there? Because I think collectively, we really have amazing power, and the potential of using that collaboration to create the shift, I think we've underutilized that. I think we've been so busy trying to just even survive or define what we're trying to do. I think we're now at that point where, okay, we do have some vision. How do we start to collaborate to work on that vision of a more inclusive, equitable, and just society? And not just the words and not just the concept, but the actual tools and processes that create that community.
Absolutely. I was just taking in, the words you're saying, and it's so true. That's that collective liberation, and it's even in, uh, the acknowledgement that I said, and I'm going to end it off with that as well. But it's so true. When we have that collective liberation together, what can't we do to really make change and make an impact? Again, for the future, because it's really about them. I'm a grandmother, so it's not about me anymore. It's about the generation, right? And what legacy and what pathways are we building for them so that it can be equitable and fair and just. So I really appreciate this. This is very a powerful interview. And I know once it gets on Setsi YouTube, others will also benefit from it and, reach out and see how they can be a part of this powerful puzzle.
Great.
Right?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to share some ideas and thoughts.
Thank you. So we will close the way we began this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we share, learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. Once again, David, I thank you so much. This is so impactful, so helpful, and I really appreciate you today for coming out. And
No, thank you. It's a great conversation.